Hello, I'm Dr. Katherine Horton. Dear Andrew Parker, dear Alex Younger, dear Dr. Bruno Kahl, and dear Mr. Mystery, whoever the head of the NDB is here in Switzerland. I'm addressing you again in my 6th public appeal to you to cease and desist the attacks against me, which are highly coordinated. They are using modern technology, and now more and more I come to realize also modern nanotech or medical tech that is inside my body, as far as I can tell. What you're doing is essentially demolishing our Western societies. Over the last couple of months, I have witnessed on my own body what your weapon system is capable of. Since I went public on the Richie Allen show at the start of December, I have been inundated with reports from other victims, and many of them have sent me detailed evidence, medical documents, scans, reports from doctors, many other things certifying the abuse, and all of them report offences virtually identical to mine. The only difference is that some of these victims have had more done to them over their time of their abuse than I had so far time to actually experience. But what is just overwhelmingly obvious is that the intelligence agencies have for decades had a free-for-all. They have run a premeditated mutilation program at the service of what must be the pharma and the weapons industry, or just at the service of sexual predilections of rich men. What I have now come to learn absolutely disgusts me, and I only have one question to you, gentlemen. How on earth could you all have become so fucking degenerate? All of you. What you're doing and what your agencies have done is way past just dereliction of duty. From what I have seen and from what I have experienced, it amounts to crimes against humanity, and therefore, as far as the leadership is concerned, it also amounts to high treason. It's high treason to all the democracies that we have. It's treasonous towards every single fundamental principle that we ever cherished in our democracies. Everything that the rule of law is based on has been systematically violated by your degenerate agents, as much as these women, children, and men have also been systematically violated by the very same degenerates. Now a situation has arisen where literally thousands and thousands of women are being mutilated, and yes, some men as well. That's right. But I keep emphasizing the sex ratio, because from that alone it is absolutely blindingly obvious that it has nothing to do with national security. It doesn't even have anything to do with human experimentation. It matches war crimes and sexual violence down to the letter. And that's what it is. We have a situation whereby our, what we thought, proud men in the intelligence agencies, the military and so-called military intelligence, have done is essentially just live out their utter degeneracy with impunity. And I ask you all, how on earth could you have become so degenerate? And this question to you also applies to every other intelligence agency and head of intelligence agency anywhere in the world, and the heads of the police as well. How on earth can you have all become so degenerate? Have you all been groomed just on the basis that you're all pedophiles? That you can have a control file on yourself? Is that your top qualification? That you sleep with children for fun? Is that it? Because that would explain what I'm seeing. I get these desperate reports from women who are begging for help, who are being systematically turned on. We all, and that includes me, had essentially a concentration camp erected around us by your degenerate gang stalkers, by your absolutely degenerate special branch types, who then shoot into us with this military technology. Really, is that the pinnacle of our arms industry, that they found new weapons with which degenerate wanky old farts can just mutilate a woman with relish and impunity? Is that it? Are there any sort of secret contracts that redefine the statutory duty of the intelligence agencies away from fighting terrorism and focusing on the organization of pedophile rings and the systematic mutilation of women? Because if there is, it would explain a lot. It would explain what we're seeing here, what I have witnessed over and over. I'm desperately trying to help women, most of whom have been mutilated even harder and tortured even more ferociously and animalistically than I have so far. And the theme is always the same. It is always rich people who get them on the list, rich and powerful people, and then they are mutilated to pieces and sometimes to death by essentially the goon squad run by your degenerate agencies. Have you men no shame? Is your biggest aspiration to pull equal with the Gestapo? Because if it is, it explains a lot, and I congratulate you on having actually achieved that goal before your retirement. Well done to all of you. You degenerate, worthless men. I am sickened by the fact that I have to literally rake my brain to find a way to somehow help and protect a woman who's at the mercy of what's termed these days a super soldier, who is utterly psychotic and, as far as I can tell, is essentially a serial killer, which of course is a tautology given the term. But now this super soldier has turned on his own community and essentially has become a super dickhead. That's what the US Army managed to produce. Super dickheads producing super liabilities for the US government. Because this guy is running AWOL. And the very military who trained him is incapable of stopping this nut job. What the fuck has become of you men? Have you all been just reared on estrogen and fucking children? Or how on earth can you all become quite so degenerate? Because admittedly that is a case from the US, but it mirrors exactly what I have heard from Germany, from France, from Switzerland, from the UK, everywhere. From Poland. It's the same over and over. Utterly degenerate men living out their worthless, absolutely pathetic sexual fantasies on defenseless women. Is that it? Is that what MI5, 6 and the BND and the NDB stand for these days, and the CIA? Is that it? The CIA being the central intercourse agency, organizing the serial fucking and mutilation for degenerates. Because if that's how it is, suddenly it all makes sense. But ask yourself, is that what we are going to stand for in the 21st century? Do you want your children to grow up and then on the internet find within a few seconds what their fathers actually managed to achieve in their lifetime, which is drug running, child trafficking, and the human trafficking of defenseless women and men being shot to pieces just because a business competitor wants their intellectual, property. Is that it? Is that the best you guys can do, Mr. Andrew Parker, Mr. Alex Younger, Dr. Bruno Karl, and whoever the fuck runs the NDB? I have appealed to you over and over, and I've received nothing but mockery from you degenerates. How the fuck could you have become quite so worthless? Mr. Andrew Parker, you, for example, went to Cambridge. What happened? What happened? What derailed you from your top-class education, which I'm told is at least on par with Oxford? Or at least so I'm told. I would stretch the joke further. However, I'm painfully aware that, for example, Sir John Scarlett went to Magdalen College, Oxford. What the fuck happened to you degenerate men? Have you all been literally taken up the rear as children? Have you all had your spine broken at an early age that you cannot stand up for your own fucking country and your own women? How the fuck can you all be so blindingly stupid? You've been roped in to execute the controlled demolition of your own societies, you morons. And there you are, jeering at me as I'm trying to actually turn the wheel around. Have you all lost your fucking marbles? I have asked you all now repeatedly to stop, at least just stop the attacks against me, because they are now public. Instead, they have just ramped up. Just the last few weeks, I basically had series of assassination attempts. Coming down from the Serpentine on Davos, I was shot in the head every single time with a hard electromagnetic pulse before every single turn, trying to get me off the road and down the abyss. Have you all fucking lost your mind? And the fact that before this scene I just passed a parked military police vehicle, a Swiss military police vehicle, just after, literally days before I begged them to stop the assaults against me. Is that fucking coincidence? In the moment, I'm sorry I couldn't actually tell if the shots were fired from the car behind me, which is what I thought, or if it was actually placed down electromagnetic sniper guns, and these people had a training round for their little degenerate trainee goons. It's hard to tell when you're a victim, and you're just trying to get your car safely down the mountain. But how the fuck can it be that I keep experiencing this? How the fuck can it be that my head is still being shot to pieces as I speak now from the neighbors who have identified clearly several times over? Now, the newest entertainment in this total brain-fucked brain mapping that you lot are said to be doing by whistleblowers. The newest amusement for your degenerates is to vibrate my arm. And that was very interesting, because it started off with just a slight vibration in my left hand, which arose after very hard irradiation to the right hand side of my skull, as I begged the German ambassador to get on the case and stop the mutilations against me. But instead of Dr. Otto Lampe doing anything what the hellsoever, mirroring one-to-one the behavior of the German ambassador in the Colonia Dignidad case, instead he just watched as I pleaded for help. As I keep saying, Michael Kanzler at the gate of the German embassy already to my face confirmed that my assessment that I'm being shot at with electromagnetic weapons through the BND, who works together with MI6, is correct. I talked to Miss Richter in the embassy in detail about the attacks, and all of them are incapable of stopping it. It's not Miss Richter's job, it's Dr. Otto Lampe's job. And he did nothing, because he, as an ambassador, is worthless. this is the degeneration of the ambassadorship. It makes him a Nazi collaborator. He willingly, knowingly watched, knowing full well what experiments are being done on innocent civilians, knowing full well the BND is involved, him being very likely a BND agent himself. He just is there to ensure that it can happen, which makes him clearly a Nazi collaborator, given that these are death camp experiments the Nazis conducted, with just some electromagnetic bells and whistles these days. How the fuck can all of you become quite so degenerate? Dr. Otto Lampe went through the German education system like I did. How the fuck can he have his brain washed to do exactly what the Nazis did? And do exactly what the Stasi did on the third time round, on the rebound. And literally, this thing with vibrating my arm, there was a pattern. There was a pattern for most inconvenience and humiliation. My arm was vibrated so hard I collapsed on the floor in pain when I was trying to shoot a video. My arm was also vibrated several times in the house, but then it started being vibrated predominantly when I was in the shower. At first I thought it's just because I'm naked, giving these degenerates an extra edge to knock off as they watch me in my flat, as they have demonstrated to me several times over that they do in high def, by shooting at sensitive body parts with an accuracy of just a few millimeters. But now, for the second time now, when I went swimming this evening, I was vibrated in the middle of a swimming pool. My arm, underwater mind, was vibrating so hard that it turned into paralysis and agonizing pain. And I meant to somehow float under those conditions. And these attacks last minutes. And then I realized, no, actually nakedness in the shower and a swimsuit is just part of it. What it actually is about, most likely from a scientific point of view, is inducing these really hard vibrations to detach the presumably self-assembling or growing nanoparticles in my muscle tissue, to then make them spread throughout the rest of my body, so that bit by bit your degenerate agents can vibrate more and more of my body, which probably somehow feeds them with the brain readout bullshit that you degenerates are running. And this is why my arm is predominantly vibrated under a hot shower and when I'm doing sport, because then the capillaries open, my blood vessels dilate, expand. And that's why through the blood supply these nanoparticles can presumably be washed even further around my body. Now, given that it starts with my left arm, I presume it has something to do with the MRIs I had. A recent one, desperately trying to check if my head isn't developing tumors after a year of intense shots to the head with microwave weapons fired by your degenerate agents. And the previous MRI was forced on me by brutal microwaving to the back of the head in the days when I didn't even know about microwave weapons, forcing me to seek a doctor, forcing the doctor to send me for an MRI, where I was stalked all the way to the radiological surgery in Munich, Harlaching, just a stone throw away from the BND, where I was demonstratively stalked by one of these German degenerates who spoke to the doctors before I had the MRI. And I was injected twice into the arm. The second time, I don't know what it was, but maybe I'm about to figure out now. An emergency medication has been swapped in a pharmacy here as well, in Switzerland, again demonstratively, because your degenerate agents essentially get off, they sexually arouse themselves, with just doing things to their victims in the most obvious fashion, and then getting off on the fact that the victim doesn't know what it is about. They can jeer in our faces, and they can get off on the power, How fucking degenerate can you all become? How many children does one have to fuck before one's brain turns into such mush? You pathetic excuses for men. How the fuck can it be that in the 21st century it is left to women, single mothers and housewives to reverse engineer military technology, to then essentially become their own barristers and put up proper legal arguments to defend themselves against the most degenerate, most well-funded, most out-of-control organization known to man? Meanwhile, you're just sitting there doing jack shit, and your agents are essentially knocking one off, amusing themselves, how these women are desperately struggling. How fucking degenerate is that, gentlemen? Do you think it's not going to actually reach your family, your spouses, your parents and your children? What's going on here? After all the absolutely thousands and thousands of reports of systematic child abuse in Britain, do you think we're not going to figure out that the only way to have such large-scale child abuse is if the intelligence agencies actually organize it? After all the surveillance you have paraded in front of me, it is impossible for me to believe for 1 second that you can have drugs in a country like the UK at the scale we have them without the intelligence agencies actually organizing the supply. How fucking degenerate you all are. Look at you lot. When the fuck will you stop this degeneracy? It's now documented how many women your pathetic agents have murdered, these killing psychopathic serial killers. Tomorrow I'm again going to attend the court case of another woman who's been implanted and mutilated and tortured and mocked through voice to skull. This ancient technology. You've got a bunch of degenerates talking shit over a modern type of intercom. Wow. And these jackasses have been doing it not just for years but for decades. Like in the case of Philip Kerr from Philip Kerr versus MI5, where degenerate agents were essentially doing bullshit for 13 years. Their leadership being too fucking beyond thinking to actually put a stop to it. And the Investigative Powers Tribunal is far too captured and far too degenerate a court in its own right to actually put a stop to it as well. Last thing I heard is even a year after the court hearing that I attended, they still didn't manage to actually resolve Philip Kerr's case. How end state, fucking degenerate and embarrassing can you all be, gentlemen? That's you, Mr. Andrew Parker, Mr. Alex Young and Dr. Bruno Karl. And whoever runs the Nazi headquarters here in Switzerland, known as the NDB. When in your CVs did it go all badly wrong? Because there's no way that such large-scale bullshit can be pulled off without the men involved having some very close networking and very, very strict control files on them. And the only thing that comes to mind is really just pedophilia. Well, necrophilia as well, I suppose. But it's not as common, is it? Maybe it's a combination of both, given all the ritual human sacrifices that are, cropping up everywhere. Systematic, the same pattern, typically involving children. We all know now. How the fuck can you guys not have known, officially, in your official capacity, for these decades, being the all-seeing eye? Of course you knew. But then you didn't do anything. Why? Because you didn't give a shit about the children, as much as you don't give a shit about the women now. But do you see, when you've got a system like that, the morons that you hire automatically by themselves will identify the most valuable people in a society and turn on them. That's why it automatically is always a controlled demolition system as soon as you expand the intelligence agencies. No country has ever survived the expansion of intelligence agencies intact, because what you lot are a group of degenerates, con artists, people with issues, serial killers, psychopaths, dumb people, and weaponized tarts. When people like you are given power, that's what you do. You take your own country to pieces. And look at you, how you're doing it. How fucking stupid can you be? How fucking stupid can you all be to continue doing it publicly after I asked you repeatedly? I have now for the last couple of months not actually felt myself properly, in the sense that I didn't feel right because my head is being irradiated non-stop. And I think Brian Tew is right. Yes, there is the supercomputer interacting with my brain. But what fucking shit computer system it is, I can barely convey to you. Every night, as soon as I close my eyes, light starts flashing as the microwave pulses are shot into my skull, triggering my optical nerve. And then bit by bit I start seeing images. This image to skull, being the equivalent of the 60-year-old technology voice to skull, is now the newest thing. But what bullshit I have to watch. Self-important old farts waving their arms around. Images of people flashing by. What, are you trying to train my brain that then I go out in the street and when I see the same fucking degenerate agent I go, oh, a deja vu? How fucking stupid do you think humans are? You morons. I think your mistake is to think that everybody's quite so challenged intellectually as the people who are infesting Ceausescu towers next to the Thames. Or the BND and Pullach. Not that I make any distinction between you lot. Behind me, for those who recognize, are prints of paintings made by Stephen Wiltshire, who's a prodigy and an artist. He can be taken up in a helicopter, and just by seeing the landscape of London from above, he can actually make drawings like that just from memory. Now that's the performance of the human brain as it is naturally, without the fucking microwave irradiation that just degenerates it. What's the goal here, gentlemen? Are you trying to turn everybody in civil society quite as degenerate as yourselves? Look at you fucking lot. How pathetic. Everything I've seen from you was just junk, including your legal counsel in court. How pathetic. Doing their utmost to try to cover up the offences against Philip Kerr, whom I quoted. Trying to make him look ridiculous, even though you yourself sent your agents and you knew I'd seen the evidence from Philip Kerr myself. You knew I had the evidence even from him on my computer. The fact that the same lawyer who was then fighting the case against Philip Kerr and has seen the evidence in full detail would stand up in court, compile a document, and claim that the sky is green when we both knew that it wasn't? How low can you sink? How low can you sink? That you would even attempt to essentially lie in court. The only reason why it wasn't technically lying is because the legal terms, phrased in Latin, were carefully chosen to give a little caveat, but of a standard that maybe school children in grade 4 would use as an excuse for duping their best friend. How fucking degenerate can you all be? Really? I ask you now again to stop the mutilation, to stop the irradiation at night, to stop these fucking pathetic pseudoscientific experiments which are worth nothing. This technology is junk, like voice to skull was fucking junk for 60 years, worth nothing. You just degrade society with this. You will never have any of this technology actually genuinely improving something for healthy people. You morons. Because the real progress comes out of people. It's not implanted in them by a bunch of dropouts with sexual issues. Look at you lot. The blog pages called MI5 and MI6 Exposed that are so wacky and so out there, yet somehow mirror key elements that I've experienced myself, so that I actually find them credible. They are just writing about sex abuse within MI5 and MI6. How women are essentially maltreated and run as prostitutes, and literally murdered if they're too ugly to be run as prostitutes. And agents who actually remember their trauma from MK Ultra conditioning and therefore rendering it worthless are also murdered. How the people who back in the day who were doing all this then became really bigwigs in the intelligence agencies are essentially just serial killers, degenerates, bunch of fucking psychiatric cases. That's the truth, isn't it? Everything is inverted. The victims of the intelligence agencies have been called mad, and at the end of the day they were the sane ones. The people who are actually mentally ill are those who run MI5 and MI6, and a large fraction of their employees. That's the truth. That's what explains the systematic mutilation of women. That explains the need to rape and mutilate and murder children for these degenerates to get off. And then to farm this service to just other people who are equally degenerate, but maybe are sitting somewhere important in a position that one wants to infiltrate. This is all public now. Everybody can read about the mutilation of myself and the mutilation of the women whom I'm desperately trying to help and support. I have publicly tweeted about this, I've publicly spoken about it, they have publicly spoken about it. In actual fact, and this is something I also would like to mention, just 2 weeks ago a memo was sent to Donald Trump, and this memo was written by a human rights activist and author called Ramola. And I actually had the honor of supporting her in this cause. And I, along with many other victims, have signed that memo that she compiled, that she had written. And I have to say I'm very proud of having my name on that memo. But after it was sent to Donald Trump, Ramola was essentially made bedridden by the intense irradiation. And she's a young mother. So we have literally this CI fucking A being so brain fucked and so utterly degenerate to mutilate a woman for just sending a memo to Donald Trump. How degenerate can you all be? Is your empire really on such shaky ground that if a mother sends a memo desperately pleading for her life, that your empire comes down crumbling, that you have to use military assault weapons? And I mention it because I was attacked as well here in Switzerland. I was simultaneously microwaved so hard that I had to flee my home. And as I went downstairs and climbed into my car, as soon as I put the key into the ignition, the radio just exploded, full blast. And the words in German, memo to President Donald Trump, was blasted into my head. And meanwhile, my car radio, which has been demonstratively been tampered with by your degenerate agents, showed the word naughty. Naughty Is that the fucking best you can do? To essentially blast me with my car radio and send me pathetic messages like that? Like, in my shock, I instinctively just punched the off button on the radio, so unfortunately I couldn't actually hear what MI6 actually thought about the memo to Donald Trump. But what the fuck should I care? You degenerates, as if your opinion mattered. We have a situation where every single newspaper in Germany and in Switzerland has essentially proven themselves to be Nazi collaborators by actively covering up and refusing to report about the systematic mutilation of their own citizens by their own intelligence agency. Now that's high treason. It is treason because of the systematic way of the cover-up, which went on for decades. So I have no time for traitors. I am sorry. You are all, in my books, a bunch of traitors, and more evidence accumulates that this is true. You can murder as many people as you like. You are about to murder my husband, my family, and myself. But you are traitors. You are all traitors and criminals. And look at you lot. Your children will actually be told sooner than you think. I predict way before your retirement. And you are already going down in history as the biggest criminal Nazi takeover we had since the Second World War. You fucking degenerate wankers. Your highbrow education was wasted on you lot. If that's all you can do, actually run child trafficking rings, organize child murder and drug running, and arms deals, and then mutilate women for fun, for the delectation of a bunch of degenerate old wankers. Look at you lot. This is now public. I'm going to drive tomorrow to see that court case. It will be a very long drive. If anything happens to me, we all know who it was. We all know who's been planning, who's been committing assassination attempts over and over. I've now survived them here in Switzerland. I've been brutally microwaved in Germany. I've been brutally microwaved in England. And in every single country, the police has been instrumental in the cover-up. The police are also Nazi collaborators. And as we find out more and more about this technology, it will also become clear which universities have been involved. I have this gut feeling that Oxford is involved somehow. I can't quite put my finger on it, maybe because my targeting started there, and maybe because of the eerie silence of my colleagues who are more senior and maybe more versed in the ways of Oxford. But that's not the silence I expect from intelligent people when faced with crimes against humanity on par with what the Nazis did. But in a sense, the prints behind me show what the human brain is capable of. And any sort of AI has a very long way before it can pull that off. And all your feeble attempts at derailing the court cases, I just had one, as you can see in my email inbox, which you clearly read because I keep being echoed back stuff about it. What pathetic attempts. Just throwing a group of morons and degenerates at genuine people like Ramola, the lady who actually wrote the memo to Donald Trump and who's working hard to essentially save her life and that of her family and thousands of other women. Meanwhile, you proud men, what the fuck do? just sit there grinning, doing absolutely nothing, when your own societies are being shot to pieces by your own agencies, you morons? Have you not figured out what this game is about? Have you not figured out that your degeneracy and your idiocy is meant to be used to actually demolish our societies? Someone recently pointed me to the detailed historical description of what an Intelligenzaktion was, which was the Nazis essentially eliminating the intellectuals. Everybody of value was essentially murdered, tortured to death, and that's what we have here now again. If you intend it or not, this is exactly what we have now. People of high integrity are mutilated to death. Your best and brightest are being mutilated to death. Your key inventors, your key innovators, anybody who doesn't go along with the crime cartel is being maimed and mutilated by the intelligence agencies. And it's now public. And you lot are too bloody degenerate to actually stop it. You are so incapable that you can't actually stop it. But unfortunately, that means that you have to leave your post. You cannot fight terrorism. It is left to the women to fight terrorism by themselves, not with the help of the police, against the best attempts of the police. But ask yourself, where in your CV have you all become so degenerate? Am I right in my assumption that you've all been essentially warped with pedophilia? Because that's the only thing I can think of that would explain how men your age can behave like that. Do you all have control files on you? Do you all just hate women, or you cannot see the global strategy in this and bringing down your societies and the next generation? Can you not see the implications for genuine national security? Not the pathetic false flag Gladio program wannabes that we've witnessed the last couple of years. How pathetic. I ask you one more time to stop the attacks against me, because I'm actually trying to save the valuable people. I've made this point several times, but I'm convinced that essentially we had a cull of the prodigies. Key mathematical prodigies have essentially been murdered or driven to suicide, or at least so we're told. But to an extent that it is a statistical outlier like I've never seen before. This means all the intelligent people in the Western world are systematically being murdered, and they are all being murdered by essentially methods that are used by the intelligence agencies. Entrapment, takedown operations, silent kill. So ask yourself, how long can you do this? My head is being shot into as I speak. I have popping sounds inside my head as I'm trying to get this message across to you. People who comment on my YouTube say that essentially the intelligence agencies are war criminals. They are such psychopaths it's pointless to talk to them, yet they have a statutory duty to fight terrorism. So when exactly will you get on the case? But I ask you one more time to cease and desist the attacks against me. You are now vibrating and paralyzing my left arm using presumably nanoparticles, self-assembling particles, or maybe a virus or something like that that is electromagnetically active. And what I experience is being mirrored by thousands of other women who all have been infected with the same technology for research purposes. Many of them also tracked down the universities and the arms contractors who are essentially running remote experiments on them. They just dial them up like a mobile phone chip and then torture them. And this pseudo-scientific experiment is more important than their human life. And they're even told as much over the voice to skull. How fucking degenerate can this be? These are crimes against humanity, and they can only be committed with the actual means of the intelligence agencies, which makes you all automatically guilty of crimes against humanity and high treason. You all. This is not just my personal allegation. This is what the data shows you, degenerates. You incapable men. I've called the military police and I spoke to Mr. Merz, if I remember correctly. Well, he's the guy who ever answers to the phone. I also emailed several times the military police, the Swiss military police, and these proud men are incapable of actually stopping the attacks against me. I also got in touch with the Bundesamt für Kommunikation, the BARCOM, and I talked to Mr. Andrew Trabold, I think. And after long back and forth, it was actually the military police who referred me to BARCOM to have the measurements done in my home. And after a long back and forth, this guy essentially sends me back to the military police because they're so incapable. But of course, when people play stupid, uncharacteristically stupid, it means they're actually captured. And it automatically implies essentially BARCOM is very well aware that people are being assaulted with microwave frequencies, which automatically implies that it's true, the satellite towers are involved, and they're involved in Switzerland. And the head of BARCOM is essentially a Nazi collaborator. He too must be guilty of crimes against humanity based on what I've seen. And so is the head of the military police. And the head of the police. And I ask you now once more, you degenerate men, to actually stop the attacks against me. Because I'm actually one of the few people who tries to help all the many other women. I ask you to stop the attacks against me and cease and desist from any further attacks. Thank you very much.